Welcome back to OpenLine. We are talking about human trafficking and what it looks like here in Tennessee this day and age. And it is alive and a booming business, unfortunately, not only in Tennessee, but across the country and the world. Margie Quin is our expert tonight with End Slavery Tennessee. Margie, I do want to talk about what's on the horizon for this effort to end human trafficking. I know you guys are always working.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the Human Trafficking Council meeting, the council is run and steered by the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. The council will meet in a sort of unprecedented December meeting. We don't usually meet in December. By statute, we're required to meet in January in order to talk about or work with legislators on pieces of legislation or give opinions on legislation. But after this degrade, we've got a little work to do. And so we're going to be meeting week after Thanksgiving over at TBI with some legislators in the governor's office, kind of dig into these shared hope recommendations and see where we can make some progress, because we definitely do not want a D next year from shared hope.
And that means the state needs to pitch in and help. The next legislative session starts in January. What kind of asks are you going to be making of lawmakers?
Yeah, I think you'll see some movement on codifying the process. I think you'll see some movement on training. I suspect you'll see some movement on identification, maybe even prevention. Shared Hope is really big on working in multidisciplinary teams, and in our state we call that SIPIT. And SIPIT meets every, in some cases, like in Memphis, they meet every day. In other jurisdictions, they meet once a week. And so, having the Tennessee Counter-Trafficking Alliance, our agencies, Grow Free in East and Restore Corps in West, having all of us named as partners in SIPIT or in these multidisciplinary teams, when a child is identified as having suspected to be trafficked or having been trafficked, being able to refer to the Counter-Trafficking Alliance agencies who really specialize in trafficking restoration, I think would be good for us in the state of Tennessee. I think it's the right thing to do, but I think it will also net us some points in the rubric.
Yeah. Sounds like it would. I want to ask you about, I read a report a couple of months ago that said during the pandemic, tips to the Center for Missing and Exploited Children just exploded, went up exponentially.
Yeah.
When you look about on the human trafficking side, have you seen something very parallel to what's happening there?
Absolutely. If you were kind of paying attention in March, April of 2020, the TBI said their cyber tips went up exponentially. The cyber tips coming down from NCMEC went up astronomically because everything moved online. So men who buy women or buy children do it during certain periods of the day, and they do it during unallocated time. And if they're stuck at home and there's no way for them to get out and the hotels were closed, everything went virtual. Everything went online. And so those cyber tips really increased. Now, trafficking did not stop, but the sort of mechanism or method by which trafficking occurred in many cases went virtual.
Interesting. Before we go tonight, we have about 5 more minutes or so. I want you to tell us what the average person, myself, you, I mean, I wouldn't say you're average, you're knee deep in this, you know all the ins and outs. But for me, for the person sitting at home, what do we need to be on the lookout for before we say something's not right with this situation?
Yeah, and I think people really want to know what the signs and signals are.
Yeah.
And I think for the lay person, the everyday person, that's going to be really hard to spot, because they typically are not going to be in a position to be where a trafficking victim is. So I would say if you're a school guidance counselor, if you're a teacher, if you're an emergency room worker, if you work in a health department, if you're a police officer, if you work in a correctional facility, there are certain professions that are going to bump up into trafficking victims more often than not. And so for those folks, we really get into the nitty gritty. with what that looks like. But if you are in a hotel, if you're traveling and you see a young person who doesn't seem to know where they are, or who is with an older adult it's not a parental relationship. We also have hotel clerks. The night hotel clerk will call and say something funny is going on in this room, or this person checked in with this person, and it didn't seem right. And so, we want to encourage people, if they see something, they need to say something. Yeah. And we have a human trafficking hotline in the state of Tennessee for just that reason. And if it's not emergent, then call the hotline. If it's an emergency and you think something's really happening, then you need to call 911. But, we solve crimes all the time in this country because alert citizens say something. So if you really want to get kind of down in the nitty gritty, please go to our website at www.endslaverytn.org and, really look and read up on what those, all the signs and signals might be.
I do want to talk to you for just a few minutes here about social media, and if parents of teens and tweens are watching, it can be such a rabbit hole into evil. And what would your message be to parents?
So I have a 15-and-a-half-year-old, so I'm not going to tell these parents anything that I'm not doing myself. And my daughter frequently thinks she's like the most oppressed child on the planet.
Right.
And I'm fairly unapologetic about that because, I was the Amber Alert coordinator for 11 years in the state, and, I've worked on trafficking now for over a decade, and I just know too much. I've just seen too much. And so I'm super careful with her online. Facebook is the #1 recruiting tool online for trafficking. It just is. Peer-to-peer connection apps like, WhatsApp and Kik and Snapchat, bad. Law enforcement can't intercept it, and kids have no business being on those. If they can't text it, then they probably don't need to be on Snapchat. And so, I have a parental sort of overlay on my child's phone, and I can see the apps that she's got. I can deny the apps that I don't want her to have. I can monitor how much time she's spending on different apps, and I can kind of ratchet that down so she's, not spending 2 hours on Instagram. I think the FBI reports on Instagram are really interesting. How they're really zapping our kids' self-esteem.
Oh yeah.
I think the internet is a great tool. Don't get me wrong, it is. It's certainly changed the way we've all lived. But it is also very dangerous, and I've said it on OpenLine. If you wouldn't let your kid go out here and play on I-40 in rush hour traffic, you should not let them play sort of wide open on the internet.
That's a great word of advice.
It's dangerous.
Yeah. Margie, thank you as always for joining us. I could talk to you for another hour. I think I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for asking us again, and we're happy to come on anytime.
Glad to hear it. Good luck during this legislative session.
Thank you.
All right. We're going to wrap things up. When we come back, we'll tell you what's in store the rest of the week.